What are the expectations for new Denver Broncos head coach Nathaniel Hackett in 2022, and why are they high? You get a deep dive into that and much more on today's brand new episode, Locked on Broncos.
You are Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, Broncos Country? Welcome back into a brand new episode, Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast here on the Locked on NFL Network, your team every day from the South Stands to the end zone. I'm your host, as always, Cody Roark, Broncos analyst and beat reporter from Mile High Sports, joined alongside by my co-host, Sayre Bedinger. Both of us, we cover the Denver Broncos for the Locked on Network. Sayre also covers the Broncos for predominantly orange.com. Once again, Broncos Country, thank you so much for making Locked on Broncos your first listen of the day every single day. Free and available everywhere you get your podcast in audio format and here on YouTube. Make sure you do us a favor, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss out on a day's worth of Denver Broncos news, content, and coverage. Sayre, my friend, hey, look, there's a lot of excitement in Broncos Country for new head coach Nathaniel Hackett, but I felt like it would be important that we talk about why the expectations are super high today and for this season while he is the head coach of the Broncos organization amidst a lot of change. Rightfully so. The expectations are high, and we're going to break that all down here today.
We are. I'm excited. I'm thrilled about this, this episode and talking about Nathaniel Hackett. I remember back in December, Cody, back at Christmas time, we were talking about, hey, who could the Broncos look to hire as their next head coach? And I think really everything that Nathaniel Hackett has brought to the table is kind of exactly what you and I had talked about, right? I mean, he just seems like the polar opposite of what Vic Fangio was, just personality wise and in terms of his energy. I'm excited about this. I'm excited about this season. I'm excited to see how different things are. I think on maybe the most pessimistic level that I could possibly get to, Cody, it almost feels like just even the devil you don't know versus the devil you know is giving hope to Broncos Country this year, right? I mean, even if Nathaniel Hackett is just, all right, we know what Vic Fangio brings to the table. We don't know what Nathaniel Hackett is like as a head coach. I feel like that in itself is bringing hope to even the most pessimistic Broncos fans out there just because he's so vastly different.
I think that's a good thing too, right? And so I think we have to analyze what has he done so far since coming into the job, and then we'll talk about the expectations. We talk about how fans should measure him in his first season as a head coach. We'll get to that a little bit later here. But like in terms of like what he's done right now, the Broncos, they have gone all in on the offensive side of the ball, Sarah. I mean, I think it's very, very evident by them going out and trading for Russell Wilson. They have all the talent on the offensive side of the ball with Courtland Sutton, Jerry Jeudy, Tim Patrick, Albert O. They draft Greg Dulcich. They have a beefed up offensive line. They've added more depth to that position. They bring back Melvin Gordon alongside Javonte Williams here. I tell you what, there's a lot of excitement about the offense, and this is definitely a big focal point, I think, of what Nathaniel Hackett has done in already, coming in and installing that. I think that's super important, but also, Sarah, you and I love to talk about this the most. Transformational leadership has been evident since day one here from Nathaniel Hackett.
It has. And the number one area that I think you see this difference from the previous regime is just empowerment, really. I mean, we've talked about it before, but remember the Pat Shurmur comment about, hey, I'm the coach, you guys are the players, let me do the coaching, when the players wanted to give some input. But it really just feels like Nathaniel Hackett's environment that he's creating, it's being embraced by the players. And why? I think that the fact that it's being embraced by the players shows that he's not just talking about, hey, we're going to empower the players to do this, or we're really going to put the players in the best position to succeed, or we're going to take input, or we're going to be collaborative. He's not just saying that, but he's actually putting it into practice. And you see that out there. He's playing a little running back for Russell Wilson, not just standing back there and telling him, hey, do this, do that. He's out there being collaborative with him, asking him questions. And I think that was something that he mentioned about Aaron Rodgers, during the scouting combine, getting asked questions about Aaron Rodgers, because obviously at that time, everybody was still wondering, where's Rodgers going to play? He said the number one thing that he learned from coaching Aaron Rodgers is just, you better be ready to answer questions. And as a coach, that's that seems like the opposite of what you would think, right? I mean, you're Aaron Rodgers' coach, not the other way around. But Aaron Rodgers has all these questions that you're like, hey, I've got to be on my game. I've got to be observing these different things. I've got to be, thinking ahead. So I love that part of his game, his not necessarily his game, but it's kind of his game, right? It's the way that he is as a coach, just really being collaborative and listening to the people that work with him and for him.
Well, and I think another thing that he has done, and players I've spoken to have touched on this, he's changed the dynamic of the relationships between players and coaches. I mean, as you mentioned, you gave an example of Pat Shermer. Players feel like they can go to their position coaches or they can go to Nathaniel Hackett and share an idea, share a suggestion, and he listens and he gets to know maybe why they feel that way. And maybe he can provide some insights to maybe why they're doing things a certain way. But then there's also that common ground, being able to find a way to meet in the middle. That's the important thing about coaching. I think at the end of the day, like, yes, these guys make millions of dollars, but Sayre, it's all about the relationships. It's about the dynamic between human beings, the level of communication that they have, which I think can ensure success, in any facet of life, whether it's business, whether it's your personal life. And that's what Nathaniel Hackett and this coaching staff have done. They've focused on building relational equity, I would say relationship equity firsthand before they get into saying, hey, okay, you guys are going to do this. But, when they're on the field, it's serious. They flip the switch, they have fun and, times, before practice starts. But, they have this mutual buy-in with each other, which I think is great. And I think it's very evident with the 100% mandatory attendance and OTAs. I'm not mandatory. The 100% attendance in non-mandatory OTAs is super important. But then you even mentioned too, the energy is just completely positive. It's different inside the building, which is a good thing. And I feel like it's been needed for this Denver Broncos team. And I think it really epitomizes what Nathaniel Hackett has done coming in to help transform things. But even though that things right now, Sayre, seem great, I think we have to talk about some on-field expectations here for Nathaniel Hackett. Maybe how Broncos fans should measure him coming into his first season as a head coach. We're going to get to that coming up here in just a moment. But before we do that, let me tell you about the sponsor of today's episode show. It's our good friends over there, rockauto.com. And if you need anything for your vehicle, Rock Auto has everything. Whether you're looking for engine parts, brake parts, tail lamps, motor oil, or even brand new carpet for your vehicle, whether it's for your classic or your daily driver, rockauto.com has everything at the click of a button on their website, which is super easy to navigate. You can quickly find all the parts available for your vehicle based on year, make, model, and you can even filter based on the brands, specifications, and even the prices that you prefer at rockauto.com. And the one thing I like about rockauto.com, their prices are always reliably low, whether you're a professional or a do-it-yourselfer. So go to rockauto.com right now to see all the parts available for your car, truck, right? Lockdown Broncos in there. How did you hear about us box so that they know that we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. rockauto.com. As we get into the second half action on today's episode, Locked On Broncos, we're going to talk about what Broncos fans should measure Nathaniel Hackett by in his first season. Before we get to that conversation, just a mile-high salute to everybody in Broncos Country. Thank you so much for once again making Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day every single day. Free and available everywhere you get your podcasts in audio format or here on YouTube in video format. Make sure you do us a favor, smash that subscribe to that like button so you never miss out on a day's worth of Denver Broncos news, analysis, and coverage from an objective point of view. Sayre, I think that the conversation, right, we all get into these moments, and I've been very guilty of this myself, even when I was coaching, getting involved in the excitement, right, the hype that's been created about like the team that you have, the players that you're coaching. And yeah, at the end of the day, it's going to be measured by performance. But I think for a first-year head coach, Sayre, and this is always a tough task because there's outliers. You look at Matt LaFleur, who got off to a ridiculous start. I mean, his first 3 seasons with the Packers have been unbelievable when we talk about a win-loss standpoint and the standard that they have set in Green Bay. Nathaniel Hackett got to be a part of that, which I think is good. Can he get off to a hot start with the Broncos? Well, let's talk about realistic expectations here on how Broncos fans should measure him in year number 1. I think the most important thing, being an offensive-minded head coach who's going to be calling the plays, what is his game management like as a head coach, right? We've seen the pitfalls of a play caller on the offense or defense side of the ball that has been a head coach. We saw it with Vic Fangio, where his game management was very questionable at times, and I think it was a really sore subject for Broncos fans. That was an area that they were really frustrated by, despite how much they liked Vic's defense. His game management wasn't necessarily the greatest for the team. How is that with Nathaniel Hackett? I mean, what else are we measuring? How does he control the flow of the football game? Will he be able to effectively call plays on the offensive side of the ball and then still dedicate attention to the defense or special teams? I think these are things that Broncos Country wants to know. I think these are the first things we should probably measure him by.
Absolutely. You're 100% right about that, because we saw on the defensive side, like you mentioned, I mean, the fact that Vic Fangio he couldn't challenge a play correctly, it felt like. I mean, the Broncos maybe had the worst eye for it, I guess, is for lack of a better term, the worst eye for challenging a play of any team in the NFL. It was embarrassing. You would see these replays and be like, who's watching these replays and being like, hey, we should challenge that. I mean, that's something that I think Nathaniel Hackett is going. It's a small detail, or it feels like a small detail, or almost like trivial at this point. We're talking about, hey, he's got to call the plays and he's got to manage the game and he's got, get the Broncos back to the playoffs first and foremost, right? But I mean, it starts with these little things. You remember Vic Fangio talked about death by inches all the time. Well, I think one of those inches that he ultimately lost his job for was the fact that, I mean, you're challenging these ridiculous plays throughout the course of the season. I think that's a big thing for Nathaniel Hackett in terms of just fitting in with that game management. Like when something happens like that, are you strategically calling, or throwing your challenge flag just so you can kind of stop the flow of the game? Are you actually challenging to try to win the challenge? I mean, there's so much strategy that goes behind that. I'm very interested to see, because Nathaniel Hackett is a very smart guy, right? I mean, we've talked all about, how he's a dancer and all these different, he loves different rap, music, and he's got such an eclectic, worldview and interests and hobbies. But one of the things that I think gets often forgotten is that this dude's like a neurobiologist or whatever. I mean, he's a crazy smart guy. So like, how does that make him see the different pieces of a game as it's all kind of falling into place? And how much does he listen to the guys around him? I think that's going to be really big throughout the course of the season. But I think ultimately, Cody, the last 5-6 years for the Denver Broncos, it's been embarrassing offensively. And I think that's the number one area this team has to improve. For me, the number one thing that I'm really looking for from Nathaniel Hackett and how I'm kind of measuring him by in 2022 is kind of the opposite of what we saw last year. How do you put your offensive weapons in a position to succeed? Because we saw enough of Jerry Jeudy running in motion and not getting the ball. We saw enough of Courtland Sutton and Tim Patrick playing on the outside and not getting targets. We saw the games where Javonte Williams had just a handful of carries, and those things aren't acceptable to me unless you're having a great measure of offensive success elsewhere, right? So it's okay if Javonte Williams maybe has 8 carries in a game if Russell Wilson is throwing for 350 yards and you're winning by 2 touchdowns or more. But it's not acceptable if you're losing games and Javonte Williams isn't getting the ball or Jerry Jeudy's not getting the ball, right? I mean, those are the key things I think that I'm looking for this season is how do you put these offensive weapons in the right position to succeed and really just utilizing your personnel correctly. I think that seems, again, it seems so trivial, just like challenging plays or game management. Like, are you going to call a timeout when there's less than 2 minutes left in the half and you have an opportunity to score? Like, that's something that Vic Fangio just didn't do. And it was so frustrating to watch. We'd be sitting there like, why is he letting the seconds trickle away right now? And I never understood his game management style. So those are the top 2 things for me: game management, and then obviously how do you utilize your offensive weapons? And I think offense in general is something that I think we need to see improvement from this season.
I think that'll be probably one of the biggest measures for Nathaniel Hackett is, can the offense improve? And rightfully so, as you mentioned. For the last 6 years, it has been abysmal to watch. It's been so frustrating to watch. Now, while there have been players that we've been like, yes, hey, this is exciting to watch this player on the offense, unfortunately, the overall product as a whole has not been sustainable. And I think especially in a division where you have teams that can put up points like no other, Denver's going to have to find a way to have to be able to do that. But I do want to encourage Broncos fans to temper expectations, at least for the first couple weeks, because I think the thing is everyone's like expects the offense to be this high-scoring, high-octane offense from day one. Like, you remember when Peyton Manning first came over and first started, the offense got off to a sluggish start. It took some time for them to be able to get in rhythm. So Broncos country, I think a realistic expectation, do not be surprised if the offense doesn't look explosive right away. I think that is one of the number one things that you can enter the season having that expectation for. And then if they do come out and explode right away, you can be just as shocked as everybody else. And you can be like, you know what? Hey, this is great. This is exciting, which I think is super important. But there is that side of that football like, hey, we don't know what the schedule is. We're going to obviously do a schedule breakdown, tomorrow and throughout the week here on Lockdown Broncos. But the first part of the season, it may take a little bit of time for the Broncos offense to get up to where we think it can be. And I just wanted to point that out there for Broncos country. But Broncos country, what are our expectations for Nathaniel Hackett in 2022 from both an analyst perspective here from Sayre, Bedinger, and myself? We're also eager for your thoughts. We get to that coming up here in just a moment. But before we do that, let me tell you about betonline.net. Our partners at BetOnline continue to be the number one source for all your betting needs and sports information this season. You can find all the latest odds, news, and sports developments, including this year's basketball playoffs, Major League Baseball scores, fights, and even next season's NLF futures. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sports wagering information, from live betting to playoffs, esports, and more. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and the action. BetOnline, where the game starts. And as we jump into the fourth quarter action on today's episode, Lockdown Broncos, once again, mile high salute to everybody in Broncos country. Make sure you join Sayre, Bedinger, and myself tomorrow, 8 o'clock, 8:15 Eastern time, 6:15 Mountain time, as we go through and we break down the Denver Broncos 2022 NFL schedule. We have a live show planned. We're going to react to the toughest stretches of the season, the most defining stretch, and we might even share our win-loss projections, even though that bothers me to do because football has to be played in order for me to get a better idea on that. But with that said, Broncos country, thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Sayre, let's get into our expectations here for Nathaniel Hackett. I think we talked about how fans should measure him starting off at the beginning of the season. For us, I think the expectations, they're not as much as tangible as we think, right? But they're goals or things that we're shooting for. I think one of the biggest ones here, improve the Broncos' placement inside the AFC West. It is a tough, loaded division with the Raiders, with the Chargers, and with the Chiefs. But the Broncos have this mentality, win the West, right? And all the respect all, fear none. I love that about this Broncos team, the identity that they've embraced here this offseason. But I think one of the things that we have the expectation, the Broncos have to be better than fourth in the division.
They really do. There's no doubt about that. And shout out to Bucky Brooks for some bulletin board material, right? I don't know if you saw that, Cody, on NFL Network, but Bucky Brooks is not impressed with the Broncos roster construction, or I guess he's not projecting Nathaniel Hackett to make much of an impact on this team. But man, I think you're absolutely right. You've got to improve in the AFC West, and you really have to establish your kind of self as, the dominant. I mean, you don't necessarily, like you said, you respect everyone, but you fear none. You kind of have to reestablish dominance in this division because the Broncos had it from 2011 through 2015. I mean, they were the dominant team in this division, and it was completely different than the way the Kansas City Chiefs have been dominating the division the last 6 years. But I think the Broncos really have an opportunity here. Like, Kansas City looks way different this season than they have. And yes, they still have Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce. And so they're still going to be very good. But I think the Broncos have an opportunity to kind of let the Chiefs know, hey, like we're back, we're here again. And with Russell Wilson coming in, it changes everything. And for Nathaniel Hackett, I think that makes it doubly important that he has to put his playmakers in the right position to succeed. It could come down to, hey, the Broncos may not necessarily win every game by 10 or more points. Like, I think a lot of people may be imagining, the pie in the sky mentality this time of year can get crazy. We got Russell Wilson. We got such great weapons, right? We got a new head coach who's offensive minded. It's going to feel like you said, at the beginning of the season, there could be some rocky moments, as there were with Peyton Manning when he first came aboard. But at the same time, even though that's the expectation from a lot of people early on, is to say, hey, I expect this offense with Russell Wilson now to be beating teams by 10 or more points every single game. I don't necessarily know that that's realistic, but I think with Russell Wilson on board and with Nathaniel Hackett being as smart of a guy as he is, you have two people as the brain trust of the offense right now to say, okay, at the end of a game, we're down by 2 points. What are we going to do that's going to give us the edge to win by 1 point with a game-winning field goal? Those are the types of things that I think I'm expecting from Nathaniel Hackett is, in a close game, he's going to be able to manage those situations with Russell Wilson in collaboration with him to make the right decisions and to do the things that's going to help you get at least one victory in Kansas City this season, right? Or not maybe in Kansas City, but against Kansas City, especially if you play them 2, maybe 3 times.
Well, that was one of my expectations that I have, is at least split one game with Kansas City. And the Broncos and the Chiefs, the analogy that I want to see happen here in 2022. If you ever seen the movie Step Brothers, at the beginning, they're like, hey, we can't walk down this way. And they're like, why? He's like, the guy's a bully, like Lecky, like the kids. And he's like, they made him lick dog poop, right? They beat him up, made him lick dog poop and everything like that. So they won that one battle. The Broncos have been on the receiving end of that for the last 13 games. And it's about time. If you ever watch the end credits of Step Brothers, they show up onto the playground with the helicopter and they just go ham. They just beat up all these kids. I'm hoping that's the Broncos here this season. That, to me, I think is something that I want to see at least once. You have to somehow find a way to even the score. And if you can get 1-1 in the season. Hey, if the Broncos somehow were able to win 2 games, I'm not going to complain. But you have to beat Kansas City at least once this season. And Sayre, to me, that is one of the most important things I'm looking for in this offense, this defense, and even special teams too. And as we've seen this Broncos team really kind of load up a little bit and try to put all these pieces in place to be able to do that, we have no idea how creative or what schemes we're going to see from the offense, the defense, or even special teams here. But this is a team that I feel like is better. And of course, addressing Bucky Brooks here for a moment, the fact that he thinks that the Broncos from number 1 through 53 in terms of the active roster, which right now, Bucky, I don't know if you understand this, the Broncos roster is approaching 90 total players. So we're not looking at 1 through 53 right now, buddy. So go back and do your research and maybe try again. The buck stops here, and I'm going to put it right there. But this is a Broncos team that is loaded up, Sayre. As we said, the roster coming into the draft, we feel like was pretty intact. There were some areas you can maybe address depth. The Broncos go get really good depth players and guys who could play for you immediately here in year 1 and maybe start for you down the road and maybe have the potential to get other contracts with the team when it's all said and done. Denver's in a very good place. I think George Paton has done that. But then again, I mean, when you look at Bucky Brooks' playing career, this man bounced around from team to team, didn't really last that long, couldn't stick it with one team and, played for an AFC West division rival, 2 of them actually, the Chiefs and the Raiders at this point. So I could see maybe why Bucky has the narrative that he does. But you know what? It doesn't matter, Bucky Brooks, because the Broncos are set to ride here in 2022 with Nathaniel Hackett and Russell Wilson. Broncos Country, let us know your thoughts down below. What expectations do you have for Broncos head coach Nathaniel Hackett here this upcoming season? Make sure you drop your comment down below here on the YouTube channel. Make sure you smash that like button on this video and comment for the algorithm. It helps push us out to even more members of Broncos Country, and it would mean the world to both Sayre Bedinger and myself. If you know anybody who's a Broncos fan that has not yet listened or watched us here on Lockdown Broncos, share this podcast with them, and hopefully we get to make them lifelong viewers and listeners here of the show. But with that said, that will wrap up today's episode of the Lockdown Broncos podcast here, your favorite podcast provider here on YouTube, part of the Lockdown Podcast Network, your team every day. Make sure you join Sayre Bedinger and myself tomorrow, 6:15 p.m. Mountain Time, 8:15 p.m. Eastern Time, as we break down the Denver Broncos 2022 schedule live with you, the audience members. With that said, I'm Cody Roark speaking for my co-host Sayre Bedinger. We'll see you tomorrow, Broncos Country.